Jack Myers is a public affairs specialist with the Social Security Administration, and he helps coordinate the activities of 29 Social Security offices in the states of Illinois and Indiana. But he is home with us today. He is a Central Illinois native, a graduate of Illinois State University, and he's been with Social Security now for 25 years. So, Jack, we'll get out of your way here and let's get this ball rolling. Thanks so much for being with us today.
All right. Thank you, Brian. Thank you for having me. Thank you for all your patience, everybody. I know sometimes these things happen with the virtual meetings, but glad we're able to get together here today. Today's an opportunity for me to talk with you about Social Security benefits, and we're going to talk about some concepts that you may be familiar with, but we're going to also talk about how the Social Security Fairness Act has really changed the way you should think about Social Security, because things that you thought previously were not possible are now possible because of the Social Security Fairness Act. So we're going to get into some information there about how the benefits will be available to you where they may not have been in the past. I know today's session is being recorded, so just for posterity's sake, today's date is May 22nd, 2025. So if you are watching this after the fact, just understand that the content being delivered today was current as of today's date. Some figures as we move forward may change in the future. One of the things that I want to start off with is some information about our website. So if we can scroll a couple slides here ahead, we'll see information about My Social Security. Once you go to the official Social Security website, which is ssa.gov, I encourage, if you haven't already done so, that everybody create a My Social Security account. What this is it's your personal portal into Social Security information. So it's going to be your specific information, your earnings history, information about your future benefits. It's a great way for you to get up to date on what you can receive from Social Security. An analogy that I like to make is, if you're familiar with online banking, if you do your banking with a financial institution that offers online banking but also has brick and mortar locations, then you know you can choose to do things on the website, or you can go in or call the branch. So this is kind of the same type of concept. You can choose to do things through the My Social Security portal, or you can contact a local Social Security office or our National 800 number. So it just gives you another way to do business with us at Social Security. Next slide, please. As we proceed to the next slide here, I want to get to our login screen. So sometimes this causes people some confusion, because when you log into sites like you're normally used to, you don't typically have multiple choices. Usually you have a login box and that's it. But with My Social Security, we changed the way that you log in or access your account a few years ago. If you had created your account prior to September 18th of 2021, you would have done so all through our website. So you would have created a username, a password. You probably gave us an email address or a cell phone number to send a code to, and that's how you log into your My Social Security account. But starting 9/18 of 2021, we discontinued that method of account creation, and we started requiring either login.gov or ID.me. So these are third-party identification services, authentication services that the federal government uses. If you created your account on or after that date, then you would click sign in with either the login.gov or ID.me, depending on which way you set up your account. If you had the old username or password, you would use the bottom button. So if you're like most people, you probably don't remember which method you used to create your account. What I would encourage you to do is take a look at what you have recorded wherever you record your usernames and passwords. If it is an email address as your username, that's going to be either login or ID.me, because the old usernames and passwords were not email addresses. If it is an email address and you don't know if it's ID or login, start with login, because that was the default. If that doesn't work, then you could try ID. But it's probably login.gov, because like I said, that was the default. If it is the old style username and password, when you sign in using that bottom button, we're going to require you now to transition over to either login.gov or id.me in order to access the account. But that bottom button would still be the way you'd get in until you transition over, and then from that point forward, you would use the login or id.me. So a little bit confusing, admittedly, but once you get that transition over to login.gov or id.me, I think it'll be a lot more seamless, and you won't have those questions going forward. Next slide, please. And actually, the next couple slides are going to be just summaries of things you can do on the My Social Security portal, or within the My Social Security portal, if you will. A lot of times people think, you know what, I'm really not there yet. I'm not receiving Social Security benefits yet, or I'm not quite ready to apply. So I don't think I'll bother with creating one of those accounts yet, because I'll just wait. I'll wait till I'm a little closer and, perhaps could benefit a little bit more from it. But the reality of it is, I think all adults should have one of these My Social Security accounts. And I'm not going to go bullet point by bullet point through this slide, but a couple key things I want to call to your attention. Number one, which is the third bullet point down, you can request a replacement Social Security card if you meet certain requirements. So basically what that means is, if you need a new Social Security card and you're not changing anything, you've just misplaced your card, if you've got an Illinois driver's license or state ID, or most states, you can go into your My Social Security account. You can input info from your ID. We'll verify that on the back end with the issuer of the ID, being the DMV in Illinois, and then we'll issue your replacement card to you. So we'll mail it out to you. You will not have to step foot in an office to get a replacement Social Security card. Now, if you need to make changes, like name changes or something like that, you can't do that to completion through the account. But for replacement cards, you can do that from start to finish through your My Social Security account. In addition to that, you can also check your earnings, so you can get an accurate representation of the earnings that have been posted for you. And then we'll talk a little bit more about something else you can do that's really cool, that's really up until recently been of little value to you, but now is very important to you. So I'm going to tease that a little bit, and we'll come back to that in a few moments. But if we can go to the next slide, I'd like to talk about a few things that you can do once you start to collect benefits. So once you're receiving Social Security benefits, you can do things like change your direct deposit. You can get replacement documents like 1099s for tax purposes. Your Social Security benefits are potentially taxable by the federal government, so we'll send a 1099 every year. If you've misplaced that, you can get a replacement through your account. You can get letters that verify how much you get. So a lot of good things you can do with the account. The direct deposit thing I want to call specific attention to. Recently, back in April of this year, there was a policy change here at Social Security that we are no longer able to accept direct deposit changes over the phone. The only way that we can do that now is either in person with an ID or through your My Social Security account. Now, there is a way you can completely do the change through your My Social Security account, but that takes about a month for it to become effective. That's just kind of a built-in lag on purpose for some back-end processing and verification. But if that doesn't work for you, you can also get, through your My Social Security account, you can get a PIN that you can use on the telephone with us so that we can do the change over the phone. So it's all about authenticating and verifying your identity, and this My Social Security account will allow you to do that. So one of many advantages to having the My Social Security account. Next slide, please. So we talked about, as we were kind of promoting this session, we talked about how it was going to be, at least in part, about how the Social Security Fairness Act affects you. So you may or may not be aware that it used to be, prior to early 2025 anyway, it used to be that if you received a pension from work that wasn't taxed by Social Security, such as a state university retirement system pension, that pension would affect your Social Security benefits. Now, there were a couple different ways that this occurred. If you were eligible for retirement on your own record from Social Security, that benefit would be reduced through something called the windfall elimination provision. So in most cases anyway, whatever you were eligible to receive from Social Security in retirement benefits were going to be reduced because of your non-covered pension or your SERS pension. That reduction, again, was caused by WEP, the windfall elimination provision. That was a percentage change. So if you had your 40 credits, you were always going to get something, but it was going to be affected in most cases because of the SERS pension. Now, if you were looking to draw something as a spouse or a surviving spouse, so maybe you're married to somebody who paid into Social Security and you were hoping to draw off of them, that benefit that you were eligible for from Social Security as a spouse or a surviving spouse was often completely wiped out through something called government pension offset or GPO. As of January 5th, 2025, these things no longer apply. Next slide, please. The Social Security Fairness Act was signed into law January 5th, 2025. That eliminated the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset, and the elimination of those two things was retroactively effective to January of 2024. Now, this pertains to really anybody who has a pension that was based on work that wasn't taxed by Social Security. Some examples of such employment are on the screen there. Basically, it's governmental employment for the most part. There aren't private sectors that could opt to be non-covered, but most types of non-covered employment would be government, like teachers, firefighters, police officers, older federal employees who were covered under the civil service retirement system are all examples of people who used to be subject to this WEP and GPO that no longer will be. Now, we have a whole bunch of information on our website pertaining to the Social Security Fairness Act. The slide that you see here has a URL, but this is a PDF. So if this gets shared with you, this link probably will be dead since it's a PDF, but you can just go to the homepage, ssa.gov. If you scroll down, there is a pane that shows you, like a window pane that shows you the Social Security Fairness Act, and you can go to our FAQ page. The next slide has a bit of information that I want to point out and call special attention to. So this is just one of our FAQs on that Fairness Act page, but it says, when will a person see their Social Security benefit increase because of the Social Security Fairness Act? So this is a little bit of a running total of where we're at in our process of getting these all updated. We estimated that we had about, let's say, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 million cases that needed to be adjusted. So right now, as of last Friday anyway, we're about 86% of the way through those. So basically, starting at the end of February, we applied some automation tools and started updating these cases automatically. And what that means is, if you were already receiving Social Security benefits and your benefits were reduced because of the windfall elimination provision, or if you had already applied for spousal benefits or surviving spousal benefits, but those benefits were being reduced because of the government pension offset, we are going through and we are removing those offsets, and we're increasing the benefits, sending you the retroactive money if you were already on the record. And most of those cases we were able to process through the automated tools. To date, at least through Friday of last week, we've gotten through about 86% of those cases. Now, the remaining cases accepted out of our automated process. So we are having to manually go through and work those in what we call our processing centers. That takes time. That takes a significantly longer amount of time to process than the 86% that we were able to do to date. So we're not 100% sure when we're going to get through all those, but the estimate that we're putting on the website now is that we think by November of 2025, we will get through all of those manual updates. So if you've already applied, A couple things that you need to know: if you're already on the record, but you're just not getting benefits, or you're on your own record and you're getting Social Security retirement, but it's less and you haven't seen the adjustment, there's not a whole lot you have to do. You just have to kind of wait for us to get it processed. If you're not getting anything from Social Security because maybe you weren't due any on your own and you were only on a spouse, but you weren't getting anything because of full government pension offset, you may need to check in with us to make sure we have correct direct deposit information. That will help us get that out to you when we get your case processed. Here's a hugely important way, though. If you are old enough to receive spousal benefits or surviving spousal benefits, and you just never did because you knew, it's not worth my time, I'm not going to get it, I have this CSRS pension, I'm not going to qualify for anything anyway, so I'm not going to file. We don't know that. We don't know about you in that situation. You're not going to get that retroactive money to January of 2024 in most cases. There's nothing automatic that will happen for you. So in those situations, you need to contact Social Security and apply for that spousal benefit or apply for that surviving spousal benefit. If you've never done that before, you need to apply if you're old enough. Now, if you're not yet old enough, you're not that age yet, then that's not the case. But if you're old enough to receive survivor benefits or spousal benefits and you didn't apply because you knew the government pension offset would preclude entitlement, now is the time to reach out. And you can call us at 800-772-1213. That's our national toll-free number. Sometimes they can take an application from you over the phone. We were doing that with a little bit more frequency early on, a month or two ago. Now we may have to make an appointment for you to do that. But either way, if you get that appointment scheduled, then that protects your filing date. So even if we can't get to you right away, at least your benefit eligibility is protected based on when you called us. So again, that's important, but there's all kinds of stuff like that on that page. So if you go to ssa.gov and then scroll down, you can find that Social Security Fairness Act information, and you can go through the FAQs because there's a lot of good info there about how this Social Security Fairness Act will impact you. But now that we know that this is a thing, now that we know that windfall elimination provision and government pension offset no longer apply, I want to take some time here this morning and just give you some general information about our benefits, because these may be things that you've never really paid that much attention to. So if we can move to the next slide here, let's talk about basic eligibility. So here I'm talking about retirement benefits. How does one become eligible for a retirement benefit from Social Security? Well, you work and you pay Social Security taxes. We go by what we call credits. You can earn 4 credits in a year. You need 40 credits total in order to qualify for a retirement benefit. And the amount of money you have to earn to gain a credit varies from one year to the next. In 2025, each $1,810 in gross wages or net earnings from self-employment will get you 1 credit. So if you make $7,240 that's taxable by Social Security this year, you'll have your full 4 credits. Again, you need 40 to qualify for a retirement benefit, so you have to work in at least 10 years. But let's talk on the next slide here about what we do when it comes time to calculating your benefit. So 7240 will get you your 4 credits, 7,240 that is. But does that mean, once you have your 40 credits, you're good? You get the highest benefit possible? Of course not. Basically, the way that it works is the more you work and pay into Social Security, the better off your benefit will be per month. We are going to calculate your retirement benefit based on your 35 best years that were taxed by Social Security. If you don't have 35 years of work where you paid into Social Security, we have to plug zeros into the calculation. When we're computing your benefit, what we're going to do is we're going to start by adjusting all of your early years for inflation. We call this indexing. So basically, we look back, everything you earned prior to the year you turned 60 gets adjusted for inflation. Your earnings from the year you turned 60 on are just taken at face value. But once we've indexed all those early years, we select the 35 best years. Now, I suspect that for a lot of you, because a good chunk of your careers were likely outside of the Social Security system, there's a good chance you don't have 35 years that you paid Social Security taxes on. That's okay. As long as you have the 40 credits, you are going to be eligible for something, but we will still have to use 35 years of earnings. So we'll be using zeros in there. So once we select those 35 best years, even if there are some zeros in the mix, we're going to break that down to a monthly average. And if we can scroll to the next slide here, I'll show you what we do with that monthly average. So this is the formula that we use, and this varies, okay? So this is kind of conceptual at this point. So this is the formula that we use, but it changes each year. So this is the one for somebody who turns 62 in 2025. So for this example, I want to get into every category, so I use a high average monthly earning amount. So let's say your average monthly earnings when we indexed for inflation all those early years, then we selected your 35 best years, then we broke that down to a monthly average. Let's say that that monthly average was $8,000. If you are turning 62 in 2025 and your average monthly earnings were $8,000, your benefit from Social Security at your full retirement age, which is 67 if you were born 1960 or later, it's going to be earlier depending on when you were born. Like if you were 43 through 54, full retirement age is 66. If you're born 55 through 59, it's somewhere between 66 and 67. And then if you were born 1960 or later, it's 67. So whatever your full retirement age is based on the year you were born, in this example, the benefit at that full retirement age would be $3,167. Now, how we get there is what you see in the next parts of this slide. Now, what stays the same is the percentages. So we have what we call BEM points, and the BEM points are what change each year. So right now, for someone who turns 62 in 2025, the first BEM point is $1,226. So what that means is when we calculate your benefit, we look at your average index monthly earning amount, and you're going to get 90% of the first 1226 of that if you turn 62 in 2025. The next BEM point is 7,391. So what that means is you get 32% of earnings above the first BEM point. So basically between the first and second BEM point, between 1,226 and 7,391. So the amount of dollars between those two BEM points is 6,165, or the number of dollars is 6,165. So basically 32% of that, 6,165. And then if you've got anything above that second BEM point of 7,391, you get 15% of that. So 90% of the first BEM point, 32% of the earnings in between the first and second BEM point, and then 15% above the second BEM point. So that's how we get through our formula, and that's how you go from an $8,000 average indexed earnings amount to a full retirement benefit amount of $3,167. Next slide, please. So this is that thing that I teased earlier, okay? Within your My Social Security account, there's something called a My Social Security Retirement Calculator. And what it's going to do is it's going to give you estimates of what your retirement benefits are going to be. And it's going to give you those estimates at different points. So on the slide here, and I know it's kind of small, but you can see this based on your own earnings in your own My Social Security account. But this tells you, what your benefit would be at 62 if you took a reduced benefit, what it would be at full retirement age if you waited until that point where you could get 100%. Or it goes all the way out to age 70, which is what we call a delayed benefit that's increased at about 8% per year from your full retirement age to age 70. And this has always been there for you, okay? So I don't want to imply that this is brand new, but the difference is we always told you in the past to ignore this because it wasn't accurate, because it didn't take into consideration the windfall elimination provision. So This estimate that you used to see was too high because it didn't know about your pension. It didn't know to factor in the WEP. And so you really just had to completely ignore it. It was of no value to you. But now that the windfall elimination provision has gone away, you can trust this estimate. This estimate is now accurate for you. And that is a huge game changer for you. This is something that lots of people have had access to and loved for years, but it wasn't really of any value to you previously. Now it is. And that's within the My Social Security account. Look at your retirement calculator. Take a peek at it now because you can trust it. You couldn't before, but now you can because WEP is no longer going to change the figures you see here. Next slide, please. So in addition to your own retirement, so what I've talked about up until now is kind of roughly how we calculate a Social Security retirement benefit. But I want to get into the spousal benefits, and we'll spend really the rest of the time here this morning talking about spousal and surviving spousal benefits, because in some cases, this might be the bigger deal to you. You know, you might have 40 credits. You might qualify for something from Social Security. You might qualify for a lot. You know, I don't want to pretend that, you know, all 200 plus people are, you know, are in the same category with this. There are going to be obviously a lot of different scenarios here for people who were watching this. But for the spousal side of this, you can get up to 50%. So let's say that your own Social Security is there, but it's going to be fairly small. If you are married to somebody who's working and paying into Social Security exclusively, you know, maybe they don't have any non-covered employment, so all of their work has been covered by Social Security, that's going to trigger eligibility for you. Once they sign up for their Social Security retirement benefits, if you are at least 62, you will be eligible most likely for some additional money on their record. Now, the way that this works is you can get up to 50% of theirs, but the only way you're going to do that is if you wait until your full retirement age. So while they're still alive, the percentage that you get off of your spouse is determined by your age. So when you start to collect, if you're full retirement age or older, you'll get 50%. Now, we also have to look at your own. So I like to use myself as an example. I'm married. My wife works and pays into Social Security. I work and I pay into Social Security. So when we get to retirement age, there's not going to be any eligibility. As long as we're both still alive, I'm not going to get anything off her. She's not going to get anything off of me. Because as a spouse, we're each only due half. So, you know, if I look at my own personal benefit, my benefit is going to be more than half of hers. If we look at her personal benefit, her benefit's going to be more than half of mine. So while we're both still alive, we each have to take our own first. And the only way we could get anything off of each other is if the other one's is more than double, you know, because we're only due half. So there's not going to be any spousal eligibility. But another example I can give you is my parents, okay? So my mom worked outside the home, but not all that much. My dad worked a full career and paid into Social Security. So when it came time for them to collect Social Security, my mom was due something on her own record, and she had to take that first. But her own was less than half of my dad's. So once my dad signed up for his, then she could also take some additional money off of his record. So there is a relationship between your own and the portion you can get as a spouse. Previously, if you had a pension from State University Retirement System, you could never receive that spousal portion. Or at least if you could, before we paid anything, we had to reduce it by 2/3 of the amount of your service pension. That's not applicable anymore. So whatever you're eligible for as a spouse, you can get. And really good news about spousal benefits is whatever you get as a spouse doesn't reduce what your spouse can get. So they get theirs first, and then if there's anything extra they can pay, we can pay to you as a spouse, that is just extra. It doesn't come off of their benefit. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about divorced spouses as well, because there is a chance that a divorced spouse could draw off of you, or you could draw off of an ex-spouse. Couple things, couple housekeeping items, I guess I'll say on spousal benefits. While you're currently married, if you want to draw as a spouse, you of course have to be old enough. If you're 62, you're old enough, but you're not going to get the full, remember. You're going to get less if you take a spousal benefit at 62. But for that to happen, your spouse has to start collecting. So you're not eligible for anything on their record until they start to sign up or start to draw. You're also subject to an earnings limitation. So anytime you want to collect a Social Security spousal or retirement or widows or widowers benefit from Social Security prior to full retirement age, you would be subject to an earnings limitation. It's about $23,400 this year. But once you get to the full retirement age, there's no limit. You can work and earn as much as you want and still collect. Now, there are a few things you need to know about divorced spousal benefits that are a bit different. Number one, in order to qualify as an ex-spouse. So it gets kind of hypothetical and hard to talk about this topic unless we kind of establish a point of view, if you will. So let's say our point of view for the time being is you're interested in knowing if you could collect something off of your ex-spouse, okay? So if you want to draw something off of your ex-spouse's Social Security, in order for that to happen, you had to have been married to them for at least 10 years before you got divorced. So if it was a shorter marriage than 10 years, you won't be eligible for anything on their record unless they died while you were married. That's going to be a different topic. We'll get there in a minute. But if your marriage ended in divorce, it had to have been at least 10 years in order for you to qualify. You would have to be unmarried at the time that you're looking to collect as an ex-spouse. They can be remarried, but you have to be unmarried. Both of you would have to be old enough, so meaning at least 62. But here's where it gets different, okay? So for you to draw off of your current spouse, they have to sign up and start taking theirs. That's not the case for your ex-spouse. You could collect off your ex-spouse theoretically before they do. And the way that would work is if you were married for at least 10 years but are now divorced and have been divorced for at least 2 years, if you're both 62 or older, you could collect off of them even if they aren't drawing theirs yet. That's something we call an independently entitled divorced spouse. Now, keep in mind, we're still going to look at yours first. You got to take, if they're still alive, just like your current spouse, you have to take your own first. You don't get to say, hey, I'm going to leave mine alone and I'm going to take off my living ex-spouse or my living spouse, and then I'll circle back and get mine later. Doesn't work like that. You got to take yours first, and then if there's anything additional that you'd be due as a spouse or an ex-spouse, you can collect that. But you got to take yours first. The good news about drawing as a spouse or an ex-spouse has no impact on the wage earner. So your spouse or your ex-spouse that you're collecting off of, their own benefit is completely unaffected by your entitlement on their record. So there is no downside to them. It does not hurt them at all. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about survivor benefits, all right? Because this is where there are some big changes. Now, this slide is kind of part of a bigger presentation I do sometimes where we get into talking about children and minor children, how they can draw off you when you go on retirement. So there's children information on here. Basically for surviving children, what changes when a worker dies is they become eligible for up to 75% of the worker's benefit instead of 50% while the worker's alive. So that's just to kind of address why the children information is on the slide. That's what that's coming from. But I want to focus today more on the widow or widowers aspect, because that's kind of the new benefit, if you will. Because for a lot of you, this sort of stuff just you probably didn't think a whole lot about before, because most of the time, if you're career CSRS covered employees, your CSRS pensions, because of the higher contribution rate and the bigger pensions that you get from that system, most of the time they cause total offsets to whatever you might have been eligible for as a spouse or a surviving spouse. So, from my experience and years and years of talking to people with non-covered pensions, you didn't qualify a whole lot for spousal or surviving spousal benefits. So, these weren't hugely important topics to you. But now that's all changed because of the Social Security Fairness Act. So for widows or widowers, this is where before, when we talk about life benefits, we're talking about spousal benefits. And because there's that comparison to your own, and you're only due half as a spouse, we don't see as many spousal applications. I talked about my own situation, for example. While we're both alive, I'm not getting anything as a spouse off my wife, and she's not getting anything as a spouse off of me. But once we start to talk about survivor benefits, when one of us passes away, then that's a totally different situation because of a couple factors. But number one, the spousal or surviving spousal eligibility is up to 100%. So, it's no longer a 50% thing. It's up to 100. Another thing that is a big difference between surviving spousal and spousal or retirement is the age of eligibility. So there's still an earnings limitation. So if you're working, you may not qualify yet. But if you're retired, you could qualify for widows or widowers benefits as early as age 60. 50 potentially if you're a disabled widow or widower. So you can get that benefit a lot earlier than you can get, or at least a couple of years earlier than you can get a reduced retirement. Now, if you chose to take a widow's or widower's benefit at age 60, you're not going to get 100%. You're going to be reduced, so you may not want to do that, but it is available. It would be an option at age 60, providing that you're under the earnings limits. And then there's also that possibility that you could get a surviving spousal benefit even younger than those ages if you have a child of the deceased worker in your care, a minor child who's under the age of 16. Now, the child themselves could get benefits up to 18 or potentially even 19 if they're still a full-time high school student. But as a mother or father looking to draw benefits on behalf of, or because I should say, you have that young child in care, that eligibility ceases once the child turns 16, unless, of course, the child's disabled. If the child is disabled, then you could potentially draw that mother or father's benefit even after the child turns 16. So, a few things to think about there eligibility-wise. Surviving spousal benefits become available to you at an earlier age. Another thing that's really different about survivor benefits is the fourth bullet that you see there, remarriage after 60 or 50 if disabled is protected. So you might wonder, what does that mean exactly? Well, what that means is, let's say, and this goes either way, whether you're a person who was married to the deceased when they passed or if you were divorced from them. If you were married to somebody and they passed away and you were married for at least 9 months, if you were married when they died, the duration of marriage requirement for survivor benefits is only 9 months. If you were divorced when they died, the duration of marriage requirement for you to retain eligibility down the road on their record would be 10 years. So big difference there. 9 months if you were married when they died, 10 years if you were divorced when they died. But either way, depending on when they passed, you may decide to get remarried. If you get remarried, that doesn't necessarily make you ineligible for survivor benefits on that other spouse's record. that first spouse, I'll say. And the deciding factor there would be how old you were when you got remarried. So if you get remarried after the age of 60, which is the earliest point of possible eligibility, you don't have to be collecting the survivor benefit at 60. You just have to wait until 60 or older to get remarried. If you get remarried after age 60, you're still good. You're still eligible to draw on that first spouse. That age of protected marriage is 50 if you are qualified as a disabled widow or widower. So if you're receiving benefits as a disabled widow or widower and you get remarried after the age of 50, you'd be okay there too. You could still get benefits on that first spouse. So that's a big deal, especially because like for life, if you're a divorced spouse wanting to draw off of your ex's record, you can't be remarried. They can be, but you can't. If you're remarried, you're not eligible on their record. That is not always the case as a surviving spouse. As you can see here, timing is everything there. Next slide, please. On this next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about how we calculate a survivor benefit. I mentioned earlier that it's up to 100%, but does that mean it's always going to be 100%? No, it sure doesn't. There are a lot of things that go into, what you're going to get as a surviving spouse. And it's really hard. It's really hard to sit here in this scenario and tell you what that percentage will be, because the factors that we have to look at that are unknowns right now are, what happened with that spouse of yours. When did they start to draw? Did they wait until their full retirement age, or did they possibly wait even beyond full retirement age and earn what we call delayed retirement credits? Because if they do that, they can elevate their benefit, up to 8% per year from full retirement age to 70. So if you have a person with a full retirement age of 67, if they waited until 70, they could actually increase their benefit by 24%. So their benefit could be 124%. Now, while you're both alive as a spouse, you don't benefit in any way from that delayed retirement credit. You're eligible for up to 50% of their full retirement amount. But as a surviving spouse, you'd be eligible for up to 100% of even that delayed amount. So, you could get that full 124%. In order to do that, though, you would have to be beyond your full retirement age when that happened. If you were under your full retirement age, you would be reduced. So like, for example, if you were 60, maybe there's a significant age difference between the two of you. If you were 60 and they had waited until 70, you would be eligible for 71.5% of that full benefit that they had earned. So your age makes a big difference there. But in addition to your age, the reason why it's hard to say and pinpoint exactly what you're going to get, it also matters what they did. I've alluded to that by saying if they waited until 70, you'd get a higher benefit amount. But what if they took it early? There's a permanent reduction that happens when you take your Social Security retirement benefits early, and that holds true even for your survivor. So if you decide to take your retirement benefit prior to your full retirement age, maybe you're getting 70% or 75% or something, your survivor would be limited in what they are eligible for on your record. Now, they may not be quite as limited as you, the worker. The reason I say that is because they're going to get, if your choice of when to collect benefits is limiting what they're eligible for as a survivor, they're going to get at least 82.5%. So if you got 70 because you took it early, now you passed away, they are already over their full retirement age, so they're not worried about age-based reduction on their own age. They're going to get at least 82.5%, or you as a survivor are going to get at least 82.5% if you are full retirement age or older. But again, it's a variable. And I'm trying not to hope I'm not losing you with some of these percentages, but the point I'm trying to make is that the worker who chooses, or when they choose to collect their Social Security benefit, has a potential impact long-term on the surviving spouse. The bottom bullet point on this slide is hugely important. And the reason that I say that is because it's totally different than life benefits. As a spouse, you don't really have a choice of which record you go on. You got to take yours you don't have to take anything, but once you decide to draw something, you have to take yours. And then if you're eligible for anything else as a spouse, you have to take that. You get them both at the same time. As a surviving spouse, that's not the case. You can start on one record and switch to the other later. So I got to make an assumption here. May not be accurate for everybody, but let's just assume for a moment, just for the sake of having a platform to stand on and talk about. Let's assume that you're married, your Social Security is less because a lot of your work was outside the system. Your spouse's Social Security is more because they were always covered by Social Security. If you are a widow or a widower, you might choose to take your own at 62 because it's the lower of the two. And then at some point down the road, switch to theirs. And I say at some point because obviously, we're kind of looking at maximizing what you can get in this scenario. So in order to do that, you just kind of wait until the point where you'd get the highest amount on theirs. Now, I have to be a little bit vague on that because I don't know for sure when that would be. If they never took any reduced benefit, then it's easy. You would wait until your full retirement age. That's the point where you would switch over to theirs. But if they took a reduced benefit on their own record, then it's going to be some point prior to your full retirement that you would switch, whenever. And we could talk you through that at Social Security. We could help you understand when you would be able to max out. So, maybe it's going to be that point that you'd hit the 82.5%. But the point is, you could start on one and switch. You could also do the opposite. If yours is good, some of you work basically 2 careers. So if yours is going to be a pretty good benefit, remember yours will grow at a rate of 8% per year till 70. So maybe you could start as a surviving spouse and then switch at 70 to your own fully maximized benefit. So again, strategies that you now have to think about that in the past were never really a factor. Next slide, please. I know we're up against it. I know because of our issues at the beginning with the technical matters, we don't have a ton of time left. I'm willing to stay on for however long we have questions. But if we can take some Q&A, I don't know if we use the Q&A feature, the chat, how we want to do that. But I'm happy to take some questions if we have them.
Jack, I'll jump in there and thank you so much. Very informative program. Thomas is going to look at the Q&As. We do have some questions come in. We still have about 200 folks online, so make sure we'll try to not duplicate questions. And Thomas, I'll hand it over to you if you have anything you want to start with for Jack there. Thanks so much.
I wanted to say, say to the audience, of which we had a great showing so far at one point, well over 200 members in the audience. We did have the chat turned off, but if you do have a question for Jack, we do have the question and answer icon that is at the top of the screen. And so if you put your question in there, I can see it and then read it off to Jack. I would say, our audience is mainly retirees, and they were greatly affected, I think, in a positive way by the removal of the GPO and windfall elimination. I guess I would ask you, Jack, what's one of the most frequent questions you get when you're making these presentations as you do?
Yeah, I think in general, one of the most frequent questions that we get, it has to do with, when should I start taking my benefits? That's kind of the toughest choice that people have to make in terms of Social Security retirement. And what we always tell people is, really, we don't have an answer for that. That's a personal choice that an individual has to make for themselves. if you take your benefits prior to your full retirement age, there is going to be a permanent reduction. That reduction will stick with you forever unless you someday become eligible as a surviving spouse, at which point in time it really wouldn't matter anymore. So those are things to think about. If you have a lower Social Security on your own and you have an older spouse, for example, who's paid significantly more into Social Security, the choice of when to collect your own may not be that difficult. It's an unfortunate reality, but the reality really is in that scenario. Someday you're probably going to be a survivor, and if that's the case and you're going to switch over anyway, your choice to collect early retirement on your own will really not be a forever thing, because you would have that opportunity to switch over to a survivor benefit. And that's really new and unique. That's not something that would have been on the table prior to the Social Security Fairness Act, because we probably, in all actuality, would have been talking about GPO causing a total offset of that survivor benefit, and your own retirement would be all you'd have. So that's a big difference. That's something that people have a lot of questions about.
I see we have 7 hands up. So I'm assuming these are 7 folks who did want to ask a question. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, you have the Q&A feature at the top of your screen. Jack, I know that a lot of our members were contacting us to let us know that they earlier this year to tell us that they got their increase in benefits. If somebody is yet to see an increase, do you know, or what would be a common reason for why they might not have gotten that increase in their Social Security benefits as of this time?
And I will address that, Thomas, but I do want to mention one thing, because I may have the similar view as those with their hands up. I just happened to click on the Q&A myself, and I'm getting a message that it's not available for the event. So I'm not sure if the people with their hands raised are trying to communicate to us that they don't have the ability to ask a question.
Well, yes, we got some questions that just came in.
Perfect. Okay.
So Joseph asks, I'm receiving Social Security benefits due to 27 years, due to 27 years in the Army. I am also a SERS retiree. Did the windfall elimination apply to me?
Okay. Yeah. So there's a chance that it did. Now, the way that the windfall elimination provision used to work was there was an exception for anybody who had 30 substantial years of work under Social Security. And there was a threshold. It changed each year what constituted a substantial year of earning. If you had 27 years, you wouldn't have been totally exempt from the windfall elimination provision, but it would have been lessened. So it may not have had as much of an impact. That would still, qualify for removal. So, you might get a little bit of a bump here. And I do kind of want to circle back to the question I didn't answer from you, Thomas, because it kind of dovetails with this. What should a person do if they haven't received that adjustment yet? So for most folks, we've gotten through, roughly 85, 86%, somewhere like that, of the adjustments for people who are already on the record. Those folks who have not seen that adjustment yet, we ask you, please be patient. We're working through them. The automated process that we applied to try to do most of them just didn't work for everybody. And so those that it didn't work for, we're having to process manually. If you're already getting a payment from us, so that means, the method of payment delivery is good and all that, you really don't have to do anything. We'll have you on file. We're working through it. But if you've never applied, and I mentioned this early on, and this is hugely important, if you've never applied for spousal benefits because you just knew you wouldn't qualify, those are the folks that need to take action. Now's the time that you need to apply for that spousal benefit, because we can't remove the government pension offset if it's not on your record because you never applied. So that's the thing. Those are the people who have a chance of missing out on some benefit here. People who just didn't apply because they didn't think they'd qualify. If you didn't apply, we don't have you on file to automatically adjust your benefit.
Jack, those higher earning years you mentioned, Stuart wants to know, did those higher earning years include the WEP type years? I'm assuming he means when the windfall elimination was in effect.
Basically, when we were calculating the windfall elimination provision, to be exempt from that, you had to have 30 years of substantial work taxed by Social Security. So what he may be asking is, when we were looking at those years of earnings, was it inclusive of the wages that were covered under the non-covered system? So in this example, under the SERS system, if that's correct, if that's his question, the answer would be no. We did not factor in the wages that were outside the Social Security system. In order to be exempt from windfall elimination provision, you had to have 30 years that met the substantial criteria or threshold that were taxed by Social Security. So those 27 years in the military may or may not have met the threshold. And it's not all or nothing. Some of them may have met, some of them may not have, but none of the years under the non-covered system would have been part of that calculation.
Connie wants to know, can I apply for spousal benefits online, or do I need to make an appointment and go to an SSA, a Social Security office to do it?
You can do spousal application. You can't do surviving spouse. So survivors benefits applications are not available online, but you can do a spousal application online. So that's, you go through and when you get into our apply for benefits section, you can indicate that you're wanting to apply for spouse. You can do for retirement, spousal, Medicare only, disability. All of those applications can be done through the SSA.gov website, or of course you can make an appointment for a telephone application.
Judy asks, I've never claimed a widow's benefit and I am now 84. Can I get more than 100% of my late husband's benefit?
No, unfortunately, there's no delayed benefit for widows. The worker themselves would have been the one that could have accrued those delayed retirement credits. So, the fact that you're over full retirement age now would not increase the benefit, but it is something that you should contact us about right away, because if you're over your full retirement age, there's a maximum of 6 months retroactivity. So we could go 6 months retro for you, but each month we get into the future, essentially you lose one of those months of retroactivity. So time is of the essence. And if you make an appointment now, even if we can't take your application for a month or two, it would still be as if you filed it the day you make the appointment. So that would be what we call your protective filing date in terms of, the starting point.
I want to thank our members. They certainly responded very quickly as soon as I mentioned the Q&A. So I thank them for the questions. I apologize. I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of them. Diane asks, my friend received both Social Security and school retirement benefits, but she passed away in June of last year. Will her estate receive a check through the Fairness Act, as her death was reported to Social Security?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. It's not something that will happen automatically. We have a long-standing procedure in place for disposition of underpayments, and that's essentially what the retroactive pay would be in this case. So there is a form. It's called an SSA, as in Social Security Administration -1724. So an SSA 1724. That is the form that would need to be completed in order to claim that underpayment. Now, a surviving spouse is going to be first priority. Surviving adult children would be second priority, assuming there are no minor children on the record. Surviving adult children would be second priority, but that is something that would need to be requested, and that's available through our website. So in our form section, look for SSA 1724, And there would be something payable there because that adjustment was retroactive to January of 24.
Carol didn't have a question. She was just saying she very much appreciates you joining us today, Jack. Charlene was asking, what percentage of taxes do you suggest we have withheld on the untaxed Social Security benefits?
It's a great question. Unfortunately, I can't tell you the answer because it's going to be very specific to each individual. What I can tell you is a little bit on the process. So there's a form called a W-4V as in Victor. That's the form that we use to elect voluntary tax withholding from your Social Security benefits. And the IRS gives us multiple choices. So they allow us to take 7, 10, 12, or 22%. You can stop, change that whenever you want, but 7, 10, 12, or 22 are your options. And then, where you fall on that. The one thing I will say, and I've kind of told people this all along this year, if you haven't had any money withheld, you might choose to go higher than you normally would for the remainder of 2025, because especially if you got some retroactive pay that wasn't taxed at any rate, whatever you get for the rest of the year, you might want to try to catch up, if you will, and then you could always scale that back by submitting a new W-4V at a lesser withholding rate next year in 2026.
How does one go about claiming a deceased spouse's Social Security payment if it is higher than my own?
So basically, you would just contact us. You could call us at 800-772-1213. That's our national toll-free number. You can find local Social Security office contact. We have a locator on our website, ssa.gov/locator. You can find by your zip code your local office and make an appointment. Again, we don't have a surviving spousal application online, so that is one that you would need to contact us for an appointment on.
A different person asked, but it's along that same line. I'm a CSRS recipient, age 77. I'm also a widow. I had never bothered to apply, assuming for, I don't know, the benefits, because I didn't see the point. If I applied today, do the benefits begin as of today, or is it retroactive?
So in this scenario, if you've never applied and you're over your full retirement age, the benefits would have a maximum retroactivity of 6 months. So it would go back 6 months from the date that you apply, but it would not necessarily go back to January of 2024 when the GPO was removed. That's why I say it's important if you've, because I understand that, you're not alone in that scenario. A lot of people probably viewed it that way. So if you didn't apply because why bother was kind of your perspective, I get that. And now is the time to do it. At least make the appointment so that we can protect that filing date, and your 6 months retroactivity starts from May and goes back 6 months. Sometimes I will say, Thomas, if I can jump in here, some people think that they didn't ever apply, but they actually did. They just don't remember it, and they never got anything because they were in a total offset. So, check into that when you call. There may be, if you've already gotten the back pay, then your answer is there. You did apply. But it's also possible that you didn't apply, or you did apply and we haven't processed your adjustment yet, maybe because we still need direct deposit info from you. So you can ask that question first when you call in. There's no shame in not knowing if you have applied, because a lot of people have forgotten because they didn't really think about it. You weren't getting a payment from it, so it wasn't top of mind. So, check on that first, and then if you haven't applied and you need to, make that appointment in the same phone call.
Does one need 40 quarters of their own Social Security to apply for spousal benefits?
Nope. You don't need any quarters to apply for spousal benefits. If you're getting spousal benefits, you're doing that off of the earnings record of the spouse. So you yourself would need 0 quarters to get that spousal benefit.
Will the spousal benefit be retroactive to January of 2024?
It will not. Nope. The only retroactivity that would be available typically, now there are some unique circumstances, but typically it's going to be, if you're not yet full retirement age, there would be no retroactivity. If you're over your full retirement age, we could potentially have that 6 months retroactivity. But, otherwise there wouldn't be retroactivity if you hadn't previously applied.
Is the survivor's benefit the same as the widow's benefit? This person says she was told my widow's benefit application could be taken over the phone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so widow's benefit application and survivor's benefit would be the same thing, and they can be taken over the phone. What they can't be done is filed online.
Correct. Yes, you had mentioned that. Jack, do you know how the 2024 retro payments are going to be taxed in 2025?
So, they're just going to be part of the pool of Social Security benefits. So Social Security benefits are taxable in the year that they're paid. So whatever your overall benefit amount was in 2025, that back pay will be part of that pool. And then, IRS will determine at what rate it's going to be taxed. It's usually taxable. I would assume that it's going to be taxable for most people on here, because typically if you have any kind of pension in addition to your Social Security, there is going to be some tax liability. And so for that reason, I would encourage considering the W-4V and some sort of tax withholding.
This member says they're 70. They're still on the university faculty for another year. They have 40 quarters of Social Security credit. Their Social Security statement shows a monthly benefit amount. They ask, can I collect Social Security now, even though still employed? If I do, would it have any negative impact on their Social Security amount?
So absolutely you can, because you're above your full retirement age, so there is no earnings limit. So once you get above that full retirement age, you can work and earn as much as you want and still collect your Social Security. As far as any kind of long-term negative impacts, there would be none. Once you get to age 70, you have maximized what you're going to be eligible for. Your delayed retirement credits that were accruing from full retirement age to 70 are no longer accruing. So there is no reason not to sign up at age 70. If you've made it to 70 without drawing, it's time.
And I'll answer that same member. They also asked if doing so would have any negative effect on their pension, and no, it should not have any negative effect for your pension. I'll also answer this. Karen says, thank you to you, Jack, for this important information. Karen, the presentation is being recorded, and if we can figure out the tech, we will be emailing it out to our members. There was just a couple. Thelma was saying, I created my benefits account, but have not been able to access my account because when they went to verify who I am, the cell phone number that's on file I no longer have. How can I update my number so I can access my account?
Yeah, so that may be something that you have. So, that component of it is typically with login.gov. So if you go to our website, ssa.gov, and you click on the sign in with login, at the bottom there are help functions for login.gov. The first thing I would suggest is going through that to see if it's something you need to get connected with login, because it sounds like it's the way you get your authentication code, and that would have to be addressed through login.gov. If they can't help you with that, then you may have to visit an office with an ID to get an activation code. But I think your first step should be the login.gov help people, because it sounds to me like when you try to log into your login.gov, the code that they send you, we're all kind of used to that by now, right? When you go to login, you get a code and you've got a certain amount of time to enter the code. sounds like maybe that code is being sent to an old cell phone, so you're not getting it. And if that's the problem, then that has to be fixed through login.gov.
All right. Well, I just apologies to our members for the questions that we didn't get to. I hope with Jack's answers to some of the others, those were able to help you. Jack, thank you so much. We got a great response from our members, as I was saying earlier, well over 200 at one point. So I'm very thankful for you taking the time for us. Brian, do you have any last words, or Jack?
Just that more programming like this will be coming. Obviously, really appreciate Jack's help with our inaugural webinar here, if you will, and we hope to continue to provide content like this on a regular basis for everybody. If you have ideas for a session, by all means, let us know. And thanks so much. We'll give you an early start to your Memorial Day weekend, and hope you all have a great time this weekend. So thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.